you. I'm going to jump right in. I'm working off a script, which might be different from what you're used to here. But anyway, so I'm talking about the William Robertson and William and Mary Jean Robertson donation land claim. Colonizing Whidbey Island kicked off with the Donation Land Claim Act in 1850. Though these homesteads were only allowed to people arriving in the territory before 1854, the process was so fraught with complications and potential points of failure that the last of some 1,800 DLC patents giving Washington Territory claimants title to their land were issued in 1905. Maybe even later. There may be some that are later than that. Like many claimants, William and Mary Jane Robertson were long dead before their son John finally got the patent in 1902. And even though you've seen it from the Keystone Ferry, their claim shows up in none of the old General Land Office or Island County maps. So their property is the farm that shows on this map that you can see right off the ferry. It's been there. It's the same footprint as it has always had. It's expanded some, with different owners, but it still has the same footprint. It's intact, unlike a lot of other claims that have houses on them and stuff. Furthermore, their only son, John Robertson, is known today. Only their son is known today. And that's because he built the critical mass that became downtown Coupeville. The Robertson problems, most of which were not with the government, but were the sort experienced by many pioneers. They contribute to a nice case study, and I'm taking it upon myself to tell a fraction of their really interesting story and put them back on the map, so to speak. In 1851, Sea Captain William Robertson sailed from the Salish Sea to San Francisco with a load of pilings for wharf construction. There his family awaited amid rubble and scaffolding. The rough little town had burned to the ground for the 4th time 3 months earlier. Though conditions were primitive and rowdy, lumber profits were good because the port city had to rebuild and the California gold rush created plenty of investment cash. The 42-year-old captain had sailed around the Horn the year before and lost his crew to gold fever as soon as he anchored among all the bobbing hulks in the bay. And he offloaded what he saw was a supply chain opportunity alone in that mess. He managed to offload and sell his cargo and store the household goods he'd brought from Baltimore in a couple of those barely floating storage containers. He got himself a vessel and entered the profitable packet trade up the coast, carrying goods and passengers and bringing back as much timber as his 90-foot sailing brig Tarquina could carry. So show him Tarquina, or what the Tarquina would have looked like. Yeah, just pass him around, that's fine. That's what Tarquina would have looked like. At the same time, his young wife Mary Jane and their 5 children, ages 10 to 15, accompanied by her brother, were on their way west. They took a steamer to the Isthmus of Panama and trudged through the jungle across the isthmus and then caught another ship up to San Francisco and arrived on August 8th. Also by this time, the captain had learned about the Donation Land Claim Act, passed by Congress to raise the population and elbow the Brits, especially Hudson's Bay Company, out of the territory. Although the national boundary had been set at 49th parallel, the Act of Creation didn't address the rights of prior settlement. And also, there were a lot of people here, by the way, already. Like we're talking 1,000 in Oregon Territory, which you'll hear is so big. But they also didn't talk about land sales or lands that were occupied by Native people. So in 1850, the U.S. Congress they passed the act, and then they also appropriated $51,840 to survey the whole territory, which encompassed Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana and Wyoming. That's 288,541 square miles, and all at a maximum rate to be surveyed at $12 per mile. That underfunding was going to cause problems. The act also excluded all black people and Sandwich Islanders and full-blooded native people. Mixed-race natives could stake out a claim, though. You had to be a U.S. citizen or have declared intent, and you had to have arrived in the territory by December 1st, 1850. Settlers arriving after that date, but before December 1853, the end of the year, could claim half the amount, 160 acres apiece. On staking out your claim, you had to reside on and cultivate the land for 4 years and submit all necessary documentation before you could receive a legal title or patent. I'll probably say patent because I keep saying that, but signed by the U.S. President. Congress tweaked the weakly thought out law several times. For example, they gave rights to women widowed on the Oregon Trail, allowed settlers to pay $1.25 after farming it for 2 years if they wanted to just pay $1.25 an acre for it, and extended the time for notification. The system was supposed to follow a sequence whereby Native people ceded their land to the United States, and then the government surveyors mapped it, and then settlers claimed the property. It all happened in reverse. 18 days after the act passed, and I don't know how he knew it did because there was no telegraph. Isaac Eby filed his claim at the General Land Office in Oregon City, which is south of Portland. That was October 15th, 1850. He became the first permanent settler on Whidbey Island. The appointed Surveyor General, John B. Preston, wouldn't even arrive at Oregon City until 6 months after that. Treaties for native land wouldn't be shoved down native throats until 1855. 2 years after Washington Territory had split from Oregon and 5 years after the DLC Act. Deputy surveyors started on Whidbey Island right about the time Governor Stevens started clustering tribes. Unsurprisingly, the treaty process created conflicts for some very unhappy Native people. Meanwhile, Captain Robertson set stakes for a claim that encompassed 15 acres of prairie, a bunch of timber, 2 seasonal streams, and some grazing land, which was down at sea level. That was going to be a problem. A total of about 250 acres. He anchored Tarkina offshore, hired 3 Crockett's, built a cabin, and installed his 14-year-old middle son, John, to hold the claim. Thank you. They all worked together to cut a load of piles in mid-June 1853 to take back to San Francisco, where Mary Jane and the other 4 kids were holding it together until they could get to Whidbey. I say holding it together because the other 2 sons, William and Tom, ages 15 and 12, were hellions from the get-go. Given their behavior once they arrived on Whidbey Island, I suspect they were more than a handful for a mother, however intrepid, maintaining temporary quarters in a city literally rising from the ashes in a newly minted state. Oh, and some annoyed Coast Salish people burned down the cabin. I might have done the same if somebody stuck a cabin on my camas patch. Still, the captain, like today's long-haul truckers, kept sailing his brig up and down the coast. At some point, he managed to file the claim with John Preston's understaffed office, which actually accomplished a lot in organizing their massive task. To create a starting point for measuring land, Preston set the east-west 32 north, range 2 east, which is 32 times 6 north of the Willamette baseline and 2 times 6 east of the Willamette meridian. Port Townsend is located at T30, north range 1 west. Each township is divided into 36 1-mile square sections, numbered from top to bottom. Okay, we're done with that if anybody wants to see meridians. Yes, so, okay, I'll explain this. The townships are divided into 1-mile square sections numbered top to bottom, starting on the right side and zigzagging down through the township. If you own property, your legal descriptions use the cadastral system. On our 10-acre woodlot that we have, which got squirrely after a boundary line adjustment, but when it was just a square inside of a township, we had the easiest description possible, which was the east half of the west half of the southeast quarter of section 19 and township 31, north range 2 east. I mean, you see this on all your deeds. So This is a thing that I keep on my computer in front of me so I can remember where the east half of the north half of the south quadrant of the whatever. I have to keep track of that. Anyway, and it has all the equivalents in the little thing on the side, which I love. Anyway, let's see, where am I? Oh, and if you lived someplace that was on a seashore, on the shoreline, so it was bent, or if you have a chunk of property that doesn't evenly fit inside one of these pieces of a section, those are broken into smaller bits called lots.
What?
Lots. Not like a regular house lot, but kinda. Preston also specified the requirements for filing. Within 3 months of staking the claim, you were required to submit a notification of settlement, giving the date and describing the land. Ultimately, descriptions incorporated a cadastral survey, but of course there weren't any surveyors. So everyone used something called a meets and bounds survey, which defines the perimeter and notes natural features, uses a compass, and maybe a common measuring tool called a Gunter's chain, which is 100 links, 66 feet long. 10 square chains is 1 acre. So it would be hard work, but not technically challenging to do your own. Trickier for Isaac Eby, who carved out his tilted square mile that didn't line up with the compass points, which was actually a stipulation of the Donation Land Claim Act. Don't know how the family got that approved. Notification was followed by an affidavit of settlement with settler birth dates, date of marriage, if applicable, proof of cultivation, and proof of naturalization or intention as applicable. One also was required to sign an oath that the land was only used for farming, not logging, mining, or factories. Some documents were validated by witnesses and certified by justices of the peace or a notary. Getting the documents to Oregon City more than 400 miles by water was an iffy proposition. Who knows how much mail got lost in the very early years of the Postal Service. Back on Whidbey, the captain hadn't even replaced the burned out cabin before there was trouble with the neighbors. Charles and Carolyn Siebert from Pennsylvania had booked passage on one of Tarquina's trips, and the captain had charmed them with his depiction of Whidbey Island. He described some good locations for them to make a claim and dropped them off to camp next to the shanty where John and the Crockett's had put up, but until they picked a site. In fact, because Carolyn was pregnant, the captain told Siebert he could erect a shanty right next to John's, using lumber that was lying around. When Siebert said he was broke and had no means to make a claim, the captain fired one of the Crockett's and hired Siebert for $60 a month. After the captain sailed for Olympia, Siebert told John that he'd got permission to build himself a house 200 yards away, still on Robertson's claim. Next time through, the men exchanged words. Siebert said he'd misunderstood and then played the pregnancy card, promising to move as soon as the baby was born. Well, on the captain's return from San Francisco, Siebert said he wouldn't move. Lost mail and claim jumping were just two of many problems with DLCs. There were also fraudsters who staked claims, took the good timber off of them as if they were creating farmland, and then sold the logs and just disappeared. Also, you couldn't sell your property until you had proof of ownership. There was the need to pay for a private survey of your claim. So the next surveyor general, because Preston only lasted 1 year because we changed presidents and that person they appoint somebody else. So the next surveyor general, James Tilton, agreed with these issues and emphasized an especially big problem. Claim sizes were so much bigger than one family could farm then that the Donation Act really invited house flippers. Not his words, but speculators willing to do the minimum and then sell out for a cash profit. When the government surveyor did finally get to Whidbey, he sketched the tiny proportion of actual cultivation on the DLCs. And we got two of these, so we'll just pass them each way. So this is a thing I put together. This is 6 maps by Dominic Hunt that I merged to show the island. And he was so good, you know, like there was so much forest that where you can see exactly where the natural forest was, and what was wet, and what was prairie, what was what. And he has these little squiggly lines, these little furrow things that show you how big the farm actually was. And so here's Isaac Eby. Where is his? His is just this teeny little square here, and then the house, and then the kitchen garden. He also put the houses on here, which is amazing. And then only one surveyor in all this time, only one surveyor, the guy John Hall. This is just sort of an overlappy deal. So this is showing the part that Dominic Hunt really didn't survey, but he has this line here that is a path that was made by the Coast Salish people. It was called Suxtaguil, and what that means is place you can push a boat across. So it was the big portage. Sure. This was the portage. Anybody coming down all those rivers, you know, on the east side of Western Washington could go right there, park their boat, or push their boat across. And then they're in the west side of Admiralty, and they're in the Admiralty Inlet. So I love it that Suxtaguil is on there. Nothing else that was built by natives is on there, but, the prairies, they built the prairies in a way, but anyway, nothing else. So the really biggest problem, though, was defined by George Gibbs, a New York lawyer who ditched his practice, went west for a while, and even before he could help draft treaties for Isaac Eby, he was hired to study native society, geology, and natural history for George McClellan, who was surveying a railroad. In his report to McClellan, written in 1854, shortly after participating in the first treaty signing, which is the Medicine Creek Treaty done in Thurston County with the Nisquallies and all tribes out there, this is what George Gibbs wrote. The great primary source of evil in Oregon and the western part of this territory is the Donation Act, which, contrary to established usage and to natural right, the United States assumed to grant absolutely the land of the Indians without previous purchase from them. It followed as a necessary consequence that as settlers poured in, the Indians were unceremoniously thrust from their homes, driven forth to shift for themselves. No provision was made to support them after their former means were taken away, and finally the treaties negotiated by authorized agents of the government, in which some small patches of their own territories were secured to them, were either rejected or passed over in silence. A consequence of this has been that a natural distrust has sprung up in their minds as to the good faith of the government or its agents in making treaties at all. Really early. Gibbs didn't just complain, though. He talked Governor Stevens into adding a provision, one lacking at Medicine Creek. Provision 5, added to the text of 7 more treaties, says, the right of taking fish at usual and accustomed grounds and station is further secured to said Indians in common with all citizens of the territory. This sentence is the foundation for the 1974 Bolt decision, which you probably all know about, in which the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the right of native tribes to fish as they always had before treaty times. Just 120 years later. Anyway, Captain Robertson probably didn't know much about this treaty stuff. He did bring the start of the Territorial Library, though, from San Francisco to Olympia. Congress had allocated 2,000 books, maps, and money to buy 2,000 books, maps, and globes, which the state still has about a third of them. He just packed them in trunks. He picked them up in San Francisco, brought them here. I mean, they were brought around the horn from New York, but he picked them up in San Francisco. Special as the library was, it couldn't raise the general excitement that other goods in the hold created. People up here were desperate for nice things and good food. In the Olympia newspaper, an arrival announcement for Tarkina advertised silks, poplins, French and Scotch gingham, French calico, silk ribbons and trimmings, Marseille and silk bedspreads, gaiters, linens, wadding, moleskin hats, Kentucky jeans, and satinette. Groceries and provisions included flour from Gallego Mills in Richmond, Virginia, and pork and hams, which they had pigs, I don't know. Butter, ale, lard, pilot bread, tobacco, nails, window sash, powder, shots, caps, lead, everything. Something for everybody. While George Gibbs was composing his scathing report, Captain Robertson was finally bringing his family to Whidbey Island. On board was John Izett, a Scottish immigrant, a 6-foot-tall, very muscular, 180-pound ship's carpenter who helped build the Robertsons a real house, which stood until 1953, but relations with the neighbors were still going badly. On June 1st, Charles Siebert accused the 3 Robertson sons of threatening personal injury, something involving Tarquina's little brass cannon, which had been removed from the ship for family protection. Carolyn Siebert is said to have stepped into the doorway, baby in arms, and dared them to shoot. They didn't. They just dragged it back home. Though Captain Robertson is named in subsequent filings, he was en route to San Francisco at the time. He arrived June 9th, bearing news reported in Bay Area newspapers of an expected attack by northern Indians on Bellingham Bay in reprisal for the death of their headman in Olympia, and news of 3,000 Hudson's Bay Company sheep being protected by the same badass warriors. But Customs Inspector Isaac Eby was expected at any time. Anyway, so poor Mary Jane was coping alone again. Their 2 refined daughters were unlikely to weigh in on things going on at home. Territorial court records in August include Siebert's request for a restraining order, saying that he and his wife feared for their lives. In October, the Robertson men were indicted for malicious trespass. In November, Siebert hired an attorney claiming they had thrown down the fences and injured and destroyed the potatoes, cabbages, and other vegetables worth $200, and that they tore down the Siebert house worth $250. The lawyer demanded $1,000 in damages. With that, the captain decided to exit the packet trade. He put Tarquina into the Sandwich Islands trade with First Officer Edward Myers. The lawyer he hired was William H. Wallace, a friend of Abraham Lincoln, future governor of Idaho Territory, unsuccessful defender of Leschi, and uncle of the guy who wrote Ben-Hur. He was a general, a Civil War general, Lew Wallace. The following January, Robertson was found guilty of trespass and ordered to pay a fine of $5 plus court costs. The civil claim of destruction was continued. Thus, in February, much of the community and what is now the reserve testified on Charles and Carolyn's behalf. The case for damages was again continued till the next term. In October, Robertson was found not guilty, but Siebert's lawyer wanted a new trial because one of their witnesses hadn't showed up earlier. But the case seems to stop here. In the meantime, Tarquina disappeared for all practical purposes. As far as Robertson ever knew, First Officer Myers sold the cargo in Honolulu, pocketed $30,000, and disappeared off the face of the earth. Excuse me. Sources to which he had no access, because of course, it was all in the San Francisco newspapers, and he didn't have them by that time. There were naughtier developments. The ship was condemned after leaving Kauai and went to Honolulu for repairs in distress. By June, the ship was listed in the Western Pacific whaling fleet, helmed by some guy named Weaver. And then it was stove in by ice in the Russian Sea of Okhotsk. No word from Edward Myers. Some pieces of the Robertson legal issues show up in the Washington archives, some in contemporary newspaper reports, some in diaries and letters, and some in the territorial court records, but not everything. Obviously, Siebert got on the captain's last nerve, and Robertson would concede nothing. One can only grasp at hints about individual characters. The sheriff had to collect those court costs from the recalcitrant captain by attaching $86.05 worth of goods from the farm. And yet when William Wallace attended the fall term of the court in Coupeville the next year, Ruthinda, his wife, told a reporter that their trip across the Admiralty Inlet was harrowing due to weather, but our trials and discomforts were more than compensated by the truly hospitable reception at the hands of Mrs. Capt and Robertson, that kindest of hostesses, and her equally kind family. An excellent supper was quickly furnished, and comfortable quarters were supplied for all. We received a most hearty welcome and made a most agreeable visit. I'm thinking the Robertsons sent the boys camping, you know. Though John was never a problem again for his folks. But William and Tom only got worse. Cases piled up in the courts over the years with the pair killing the Kellogg's red heifer. One of them shot the neighbor's beloved Newfie because it batted his puppy. Tom smashed Sheriff Hathaway over the head with a stick and cut him to the bone. And then he took, let's see, what was it? Oh, then John, when John was sheriff, he had to shoot Tom to keep him from stabbing him. So, and then he had to take his brother William to the Steilacoom Insane Asylum. Kellogg is the one that wrote the papers, of course, but John took him there and he died at age 42. So I'm thinking there was something physically wrong, like a brain tumor. Who knows, but 42. Tom did 2 stretches at the state penitentiary at Walla Walla, one for second-degree murder when he was 63, and the other in his 80s for assault with intent to kill with a butcher knife. He died there. Mugshot. That's the modern picture. I found his mugshot. Anyway, as for the Sieberts, Charles became known as a wife-beater. He kicked Carolyn in the womb so hard that their first son, Edward, was born brain damaged. The territorial legislature gave her a divorce in 1863, and she moved to San Francisco and remarried. 10 years later, Charles got her to let him take the poor, addled kid to live with him and his new wife in Snohomish. But when he threatened to kill Edward if he didn't find the shotgun he had dropped when he got lost in the mucky slough, the terrified lad took an axe and hacked him to death while he was sleeping. And then the kid got in a canoe and paddled to Seattle and just turned himself in. The new wife took the baby and skedaddled back to the Tulalip Reservation. And when Siebert's hometown newspaper reported his death, the story mentioned that he had gone west to flee a murder rap as a young man. So Edward got off for diminished capacity, which was a very early case for that, and just went back to San Francisco. Nobody grieved his rotten father. I just don't understand why the neighbors backed a thug like Siebert. But then people were firmly tight-lipped about every kind of family problem. Robertson descendants didn't even know. I've talked to them. They didn't even know Tom or William existed. So you just bury stuff, you know, it's unpleasant, just bury it. You know, despite the fact that their antics were locally well known and disparaged in various neighbors' diaries and newspaper accounts, violence in the home was just not uncommon. The Ebys had a serial rapist stepson. Drunkenness, spouse abuse was such a problem the women of Coupeville got together in 1886 and insisted it become the first dry town in the state. The divorce rate through the territory was surprisingly high, but those stories are another time. Back at the DLC. Finally, the government deputy surveyor arrived on Whidbey in September 1856. Dominic Hunt, a 40-year-old Irish immigrant, signed a contract with Surveyor General Tilton to survey the Whidbey Island townships north of T30. That's Lake Hancock. So everything north of Lake Hancock he was supposed to cover, and to survey all the DLCs. Hunt's field notes walk you through an expensive and labor-intensive process in which a minimum of 3 subs was required. In his case, he hired another Irishman, Patrick Doyle, to wield the axe that cut through the undergrowth, because you're bushwhacking. Michael McDonald and Joseph Maddox carried and stretched out a gunter chain. By the way, Maddox was the teenage son of the widow Maddox, the only woman to find and prove up a DLC in Washington Territory on her own. We have her photo on the wall inside if you don't know who she is. She went through a lot. Surveying was expensive due to equipment and labor costs. In Western Washington, the job required an elaborate solar compass. That's the thing that Dominic was carrying is really heavy. I've seen them. They're heavy. That cost, and they had to use that because there's so much iron in our ground. Hunt mentioned placing a quarter-section post by a monster Douglas fir tree, 80 inches in diameter. Figuring that stump would have to be too big, too humongous for anybody to remove, I followed his notes to find it, see if I could. And there it was, right off Gramari Road, if you know where that is, Toronto, and found it in the woods. My Stanley tape measure stretched to 87 inches, actually. And that's 22 feet in circumference. That's how big it was. It's a big tree. Anyway, I was able to use a metal detector during COVID to find the Robertson house because it had burned down in 1953. But it was right where Hunt had mapped it. There's this dot, and I could just, there it is. Because since it had burned down, there was pieces of metal still on the ground. And then you find the porch step, so you know you're there. Unfortunately, just that Suxtaguil is the only thing that those guys, they did not note native constructions or buildings or anything, which is unfortunate. It'd be kind of fun, if they had. After Dominic Hunt finished surveying his first two Whidbey Island townships, T31 North Range 2E, which is down there above Lake Hancock, and then what we call, where Eby's Prairie is, he covered 17 donation land claims in late fall throughout the next year. He started on townships again in May of 1858, getting through the Cove, Partridge Point, Oak Harbor, Paulnell Point, and then right after the 4th of July, he was murdered. He was last seen paddling his canoe along going out there to the Swinomish Slough. He was going to go heading for Whatcom, wearing his same old gray satinette trousers. Satinette, that fabric, remember I mentioned earlier? That's the stuff that Confederate soldiers wore in Civil War. So it's that thick, it's not satiny at all. I had to see a picture because I was like, what? That made no sense. Gray satinette trousers, black wool hat, and blue overcoat. Important to know that Isaac Eby had just been shot exactly a year ago, almost to the day. And so everybody was still really antsy. We know Dominic Hunt surveyed the Robertson place sometime between September 1856 and his death because the family still has his original notes. That's a photo I made of it. It's blown up there. Strangely, though, his notes for this, which read like all the notes for the other DLCs he did, are not listed in the GLO records, the General Land Office records, or anywhere. I don't know how they missed. But though the document isn't dated, because you'll look at it, there's no date on the thing, we know he wrote it because the handwriting matches all the IOUs he signed as he was leaving, because he had to borrow money to keep his subcontractors right after the 4th of July there, and he was going out there, so he borrowed money from all these guys. Daniel Shaw over there, he was one of the last ones that he owed money to because he took care of him when he was sick. The Robertson DLC survey definitely shows the claim, because I had a surveyor map it out. He took the notes and he put it on the map. And so it definitely shows that the survey claim extends west along the water into the next township and stops 1/3 of a mile short of Driftwood Park. So, and all of that, let's see, can I see that for 1 sec? Okay, so this dotted line here, that's the end of the township. The new township starts that way. So the dotted line is the township. So his land, he had, so that's how it was. But you look at this and you'll see a dot where Siebert's house is. Because he called it Seabard, he didn't know. Hunt was, he was a, Irishman, he didn't know. Siebert. Oh, okay. So the IOUs were all presented for probate. So I've seen them. They have them up there in Bellingham. And they absolutely match the handwriting on that description. So The Robertson DLC definitely shows, I can't pinpoint exactly when, but Captain Robertson's lawyer, Wallace, filed a suit against Siebert over the claim boundary. During the August term, multiple allegations of selling liquor to Indians were being tried, and there was a retrial for the man Isaac Eby had prosecuted the day he died. And that was going on. This guy named Regan, who was in the Army. That was happening when Sheriff Heimbaugh paddled into Coveland with a badly decomposed body, presumed to be Dominic Hunt's. He'd been shot. Winfield Eby, in particular, freaked out and zoomed home. The October docket included the Robertson suit, as Winfield mentions in his diary, because he was working for Siebert, and Judge Frank Chenoweth had joined the team. Also on the docket were several other DLC boundary disputes, because this was not uncommon, and the trial of the two Swinomish men accused of killing Hunt. That proceeding only took 2 days. They got a conviction. Squitalis and Skyockham would be hanged at Fort Bellingham in less than 2 months. Starting late the next day, and for another, the lawyers argued Siebert v. Robertson. According to Winfield's diary, the issues at stake were continuous residence and cultivation, except during the Indian War. They gave you a break, but Siebert participated in that, and Robertson did not. Siebert's team even checked the certificates of the customs inspector as to when Tarkina came and went during the summer and fall of 1853. But given the residence of the family on site and the presence of Mary Jane, the wife, the issue of his business travel seems really picky. The suit dragged on. The Robertson raised a potato crop in 1860, 1,800 bushels, which was a record. Their apple orchard, planted with starts brought from Oregon by Isaac Eby, produced enough fruit to take to market. Those are some young trees. William and Thomas found a dead native woman clad only in a chemise on the beach. She had been stabbed. And then another two, all of whom they buried, according to the captain. Really? Just washed up? You get suspicious of these guys, you know? These two guys. In 1861, Robertson was appointed lighthouse keeper at Admiralty Head. That October, oh my goodness. Oh yeah, did I miss John? Not yet. Okay. He was appointed lighthouse keeper. It was the first one. In October, the Registrar of Public Lands notified him by mail of the decision to come down on Siebert's side in the boundary conflict. This is another case in which, I don't know when or why, but it left territorial court and went to the GLO office. I don't know why. The captain lost his mind. He ranted a bunch of nonsense about Frank Chenoweth selling his kids to the Indians in a letter to his attorney, but he also lays out the claim jumping issue, the sequence, really clearly. However, by that time, President Lincoln had appointed Wallace to be the delegate to Congress from Washington. There were several sessions that fall, which kept Wallace in D.C. or traveling the whole time. The Civil War was on. Even if he got the letter, the man couldn't have done anything. But John Robertson, at 21, had already begun to develop Front Street in Coupeville, starting with buying the northeast corner of the Alexander claim from Gray Street, next street over, to Main Street, and building a store. 5 months afterward, after the captain got the GLO letter that set his hair on fire, John paid the Sieberts $700 for the missing land, for the lost land. And I was like, okay, I'll buy it from you. Over time, John became a wealthy man, buying and selling property, running profitable businesses. The deed books contain dozens and dozens of his land transactions. He acquired hundreds of acres on his own. He hated farming. In 1875, Mary Jane, the mother, died on the farm at 58. I'd be dead too by then. The captain followed 14 years later. Here's Mary Jane and him, and they're years. And the captain, just because he's all hairy and everything, that doesn't mean he's scary. Anyway, John bought out both brothers' share in the estate. Women obviously didn't get a share because there were two sisters. But 20 years later, the government granted the William and Mary Jane Robertson patent on 167 acres. But John pressed on. In 1902, a patent for 246 and a half acres was signed by Theodore Roosevelt or one of his minions. So that's the patent downloaded from the General Land Office. One might ask, oh no, I'm not going to go into that. Where are we on time? Blech. Okay, I'm good, I can say it. One might ask how a DLC could be certified after the claimant has died. Well, in 1888, the U.S. Supreme Court, ruled on just such a case in Washington Territory. Thus, when the settler died, after providing the necessary documentation, the donation land could successfully transfer to the heirs. This was one of several rulings on the specifics of DLC inheritance that together explained John's push to buy out his brothers and keep it together. Eventually, John sold the family farm to H.B. Lovejoy, who was married to his niece Lily. Lovejoy sold it to Fort Casey's first doctor, Earl Sargent, and his wife Bessie. In the 1940s, the Lee brothers of Seattle bought it and kept it as a hobby farm. This is Steve Lee, who just died a few years ago. They had it for 70 years. Judy Lee sold the whole thing to the Whidbey Camino Land Trust. So if the place has remained intact, why doesn't it appear on maps? Well, Hunt died in the middle of all this, and another surveyor type drew the DLC maps. The DLC map of this township was drawn up. Here we are. This is the DLC map of this township, or not this township, my township. Just south of the oil, well, I guess it's west of here. Yeah, west of here. And you can only see Benjamin Welcher and his brother Lewis and the Patrick Doyle DLCs, but the Robertsons would be right there, and it's not there. So that map was that was drawn in 1861, I believe, in the print of the scribble on the side. And then the map of the township in which the Robertson claim, that was really late. And then the one with
71.
No, it's actually earlier. That's added. It was accepted later. That's it.
I see.
Yeah. So these maps were drawn long after he was dead. So maybe that was a problem. Or one factor might relate to life in that time being so labor-intensive, dangerous, lonely, and stressful. Captain Robertson was once the ultimate boss of ships at sea. He seems to have become somewhat bitter and contrary in his old age. In an 1880 interview with Eldridge Morse, his thoughts went right to the theft of Tarkina and its cargo. And but he went on to brag that he was well-to-do. And he said he was the first lighthouse keeper, but resigned 4 years later, which is a white lie. He was fired because a different president came in, So Millard Fillmore was out, and I can't remember who James K. Polk. I can't remember which one was the next one. But anyway, he could have paid $311 and just bought the land outright, but he didn't. That was that $1.25 an acre thing. He could have done that. If he was well-to-do, he could have done that. John Robertson later sold up and died in Alaska during World War I. Would the family farm be better known if the Robertson name had stayed here longer? Nah. Ben and Lewis Welcher were gone by the late 1850s, and they're on that map. And Patrick Doyle sold out to his boss, Sam Hancock, in 1860. It didn't help that everyone around here was appalled by William and Tom. I wish somebody could spell it out for me. But, hey, Charles Siebert's name, his claim, is also left off all the maps. So, that's it. Huh?
That's your next.
No, I've killed myself to get this.